evening, everyone.
Good evening.
We have a call to order at 7:03. Roll call tonight. We don't have with us Karen, Eric, Alan, and Teresa, but we do have a quorum of 5 out of a 9-person board, so we can proceed. I'd entertain a motion on approval of the minutes from our September 11 meeting. Motion by Patty, second?
Second.
Second by Phil. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you for those minutes, Shirley. Under Chairman's report, I do not have a budget report for you this month. Shirley and I will obtain that from Todd, and when we get that, we'll just forward it along. There's been no activity since our last meeting, correct. Item 4B, Application Subcommittee. I put this back on the agenda. It was a comment that I made a few months ago about trying to figure out a way for us as a committee to onboard or assist potential applicants with the application process. I think I'd rather bring this up when we have more members here, but essentially what I'd like to clarify and get some feedback on from folks would be that if we do have an applicant, I want to be clear, the pre-application early group discussion is not what I consider to be a bad thing for all of us to meet somebody if they want to come in. But if someone does proceed past the early Part A process, my thought is that we should have members of this committee serve as an application liaison. I'm using the term subcommittee, but I'm rethinking it in the sense that a subcommittee requires scheduling meetings, and it can be a little more complicated. So my example would be this: if someone came to this committee looking to use money from the open space recreation bucket, that it would be logical that the representative, that Phil would be a logical person to be a liaison with that applicant.
And that actually has kind of already happened.
I think it's moved in that direction, and I think what I'm trying to minimize through doing this, historic, these other examples, housing and such, is to minimize the efforts of the applicant, not minimize the efforts, to minimize the chance of errors of omission, so that it's not a 1 or 2 or 3 month process where someone comes to a meeting to review the full application and it turns out that there are parts that are missing. A liaison from the committee could, as an individual, say, look, the way I read it, you need to have 3 quotes. The way that I read it, there needs to be a document from a supporting town board. So what I'd like to, there's nothing pending right now, it's probably a good time to be talking about this, but I'd like to just walk through that process, maybe at a future meeting. And then as they come in, we can see how people feel about that. And it doesn't have to be the solid single person, like from a particular committee, but it could be. Hi, Teresa. That's all right. We're half done. No worries.
I would say 2 things. One is that I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, limited experience has suggests that kind of liaison type cooperation could both expedite an application that's worth expediting and waste a lot of less time, both our time and calendar time, and few missed deadlines, more successful projects, I would think.
That would be my hope. In addition, if we are looking for the respective or the relevant town board to show support for the application, it's likely that the person being in the liaison serves on, with the exception of the citizens at large, they would serve on the board that would ultimately be speaking to the matter or at whatever committee they're on. So
One
question. What if the person who's liaison to that particular thing, right? And I know I hate what if too, but what if the person who's the liaison in that instance is really not necessarily in favor of the project? They're only being a liaison because they're almost required to. So that could create an issue.
I think we could definitely cross that bridge. The liaison should not be mistaken as an advocate. I would see it merely as cutting down on this committee's time to have to review the process. So if someone were asked to help someone and they may not be personally in favor of it, well, this is a 9-person board, and I'm sure that there's a way that we could, that we could mitigate that. But in general, one should not mistake that a liaison wouldn't necessarily be the person who's the lead cheerleader, because they could also be a critical friend and say, look, this is not detailed enough. I know if you come in front of me a month from now, this should be a paragraph of detail and not just a sentence, and that's okay too.
Right, it might be a favor to that particular project if there's several serious warts on it, they were pointed out sooner rather than later. You know, if there was something that, it wouldn't be a matter of preference, but maybe a flaw in either the thinking or the concept or the applicability to CPC or something they overlook. So again, to prevent overlooking.
I think that's the spirit behind it.
Are you thinking of one person from us, or like two people from this committee with help them?
Or different
Off and
people
on.
depending on the project.
Well, I'm thinking,
curious.
my original thought was a subcommittee, but then again, looking at, looking at all the time that we're volunteering and people are very busy, to have a subcommittee means you're posting for a meeting and
Yes.
you're maintaining
Yeah.
minutes, and whereas a liaison is an individual person who has essentially been assigned to help shepherd the application, and that's where I guess that's where my thought process is now, that, and it might be availability. It could be that if Teresa's not available and there's a housing application coming down the pipeline, someone else, I mean, it's not about being knowledgeable about the subject matter, it's about a complete application, yay or nay, that when it comes to us in paper form, maybe what it means is that we know there's an increased level of confidence that all the parts are in place, and then we can begin the discussion as a group. There's no, I'm not trying to minimize the group discussion with the applicant.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
just making sure that if we're going to ask committee members to invest their time reading an application, that there's a higher likelihood that it's,
One person.
that it's a complete application. So,
And therefore, one more comment, sorry. John.
No, go ahead.
Regarding the application itself, I know that a couple of you guys last year revised the pre-application and the filing, and as someone who has used it this year, I salute your efforts, because I think it made it significantly easier than 2 years ago, and I think the results speak for themselves.
Great.
So thank
Happy to
you.
hear that.
I'm hoping.
Can I make a suggestion?
John, please.
I just want to throw it out there. I think that if we have a liaison person, I think it's a great idea, right? But I also think that the rest of the board should be in the loop, so that schedules, things like that, discussions that we've had, go through you or Shirley, so that we all have awareness of what the discussions are, who's talking to who. things like that.
Absolutely, and in fact, we could make it a standing agenda item
Right.
for that, and we could put that on the agenda, so that if an application comes in through the chair and and I communicate with the person who is let's say, represents that board, that it would be their wheelhouse, great, or maybe we're asking a citizen at large to be the liaison, we'd have it as an agenda item, so it's, oh yeah, but you've been working with person X for several months on working on application. That, you're right, John, it just keeps everybody aware, and we'll be ready to do our homework when something's ready to read.
It might be worth also, just sort of as a practice, having it that if there's a liaison and there's any email communication between the liaison and the applicant, they always copy you.
Yeah.
They just copy you, and you'll then see how different liaisons work.
Correct.
You'll kind of be able to see,
That's
not that you'd have to read all of it in depth, but you
No,
can kind of get
that's
a
a,
sense
that's
of
a
the
good
facts.
practice. That's,
Kind of
that,
interaction.
It doesn't-
And there's a record that it's not just one person.
Checks
Yeah.
and balance, because some people
Right.
let things go when they get busy or something.
Yes,
You
that's
should
a
be
good
aware of
idea.
it.
yeah, I think that's both the suggestions are very reasonable. So I'll bring it up for the future, and we'll see when the next formal application comes in and how we handle it. But I can certainly make sure it's a standing agenda item, ask a liaison to continue to loop me in during deliberation, conversations. That's
Can we
great.
just put it on our website or something that there is help available in guiding you through this process so that people will be more inclined
Not
to
panic.
actually, not panic and maybe do this a little bit more so that,
Help with a small H.
right.
Now, may I make another suggestion? I
Certainly.
think we should vote on this, right, with the people that are here. And then if anyone raises an objection, we can always change our vote. But I think it's a good idea to just get this ball rolling and just, put it out there.
Okay.
So I'd like to make that motion.
And so the motion would be that we adopt a liaison model for incoming CPC applications with the suggestions noted, including a statement about help on the website, a standing item on our agenda where liaisons can report out, as well as a protocol where the liaison would CC the chair on any communications with the applicants.
I'll
So-
second.
Second, oh, okay.
Second by Teresa. Any discussion?
No.
Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous.
It's finished.
Thank you very much.
Very nice, very
Thank you.
good.
Thanks, yes.
Under 4C Other, alluding to what I said a moment ago, which is that we don't currently have any applications in the queue, I wanted to know what the feelings of the committee would be if we did not have our November meeting.
Good job.
Motion.
I want a second.
Okay. And any motion made by John and second by Teresa.
Discussion
Any
being that
discussion?
there is a motion coming from the Hanson Historical Commission, and the timing of that, though, to get on the spring, however, is February?
I believe that if we want, yes, Teresa, I think my memory is that the deadline for May town meeting, at least for warrant placeholders, is early in the new year calendar, possibly no later than February.
Maybe January meeting.
And February, and December's meeting.
December's meeting, it
January.
needs to be it?
A December, good question. So if the liaison process were to go through and we have a complete application, really it depends on the timing. It could be discussed in December, voted on in January, discussed in December, or discussed in January, voted on in February, with the possibility of the committee voting at least a placeholder, pending X, Y, Z. But I do think that February is probably the latest. And again, I'm sorry, was that?
Yeah, so if I have a part A by January with discussion with whoever the liaison would be, then a part B, the final application could be voted in February.
I would say yes, provided that it's something that Shirley that we could get out to committee members
Yeah,
for a comfort level in terms of,
between January and February.
Sure, but very likely that matter, we could have that on a January agenda as a report out from a liaison that, look, Historic's got this coming down the pike, this is what it is.
So is it still a big secret, or can we know what it is?
Oh, it's the boulders, it's the
boulders.
signs.
Yes.
Plaques on
The
the
plaques,
flags,
but we're also looking at doing actual signs around town, and so getting the language down right and where they go impacts whether it's a boulder or the
Or
sign.
sign.
So
Right.
that's what we're still
A
working on.
mix of things, mixed media.
But we're moving forward, we are moving on it, so I think by December we'll have everything in place.
You want this done for the 400?
For the
200.
400?
It will definitely be done.
Definitely want it to be
before
done.
100.
Ideally for the
Hopefully.
200.
I've got Plymouth
tell
on
you.
my brain.
The Thomas Mill restriction might not be done by the 400th, but this will be done, yes.
Can I offer something
Sure.
briefly on that? I looked into this a little bit, you should look into it as well. All the boulders, if you're looking on like private property or anything like that, according to CPC, they would have to have
Deed
some kind of
restrictions.
easement in perpetuity, or whatever they call it.
So that's figuring out where they would actually be, that would hopefully be a town piece of property rather than somebody's private property.
That's a valid point, yes. So yes, not looking to, anyway, so the idea is that the timing and the volume of what we're dealing with right now, a November meeting would likely just be, the heart of it would be updates on existing projects, and I would prefer, given everybody's limited available time, that is something that we can certainly catch us up on at a December meeting. So any further discussion on this?
No.
Okay, we don't need to vote on it, but I'll take a vote anyway since a motion was made. All in favor of us resuming our meetings at our regular December meeting?
Yes.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Okay.
So Shirley, if you wouldn't mind, as part of any communication to the full committee, that we won't be having our November meeting. Thank you. Also under other, I would say, as a means of an agenda adjustment, we will not be dealing with item 5A, the Ocean Spray Park application. That was, that I just did not remove that. It has not, and I'm not sure whether that application, that may not be brought forth. So I'm waiting for clarification on that.
Okay.
I would carry it as an agenda item as a courtesy, but I'll look to resolve that sooner than later. And also, item 6A will not be discussed. The 200th Anniversary Committee had reached out originally thinking that CPC could assist them with something, and then upon further research, realized that it wasn't eligible. So that won't be on our agenda. And with,
Sorry, can I just add something?
Sure,
I just
John.
thought of this ocean spray thing, right? I feel like we're doing them a disservice and ourselves as well, right? I think we should send them a letter telling them that this application is not going to go forward as is, and that, you know, if there's all kinds of substantial changes, they should probably redo it anyway. So I'm wondering if we should just put this to rest so that they can move on and go in the direction that they want to go in.
I would say, John, if I can reach back out to the primary, at least to the primary applicant. I know that in my last communication with him, I had alerted him to the planning board's correspondence from a late summer, early fall meeting, and essentially suggested that based on the letter, given that the planning board would be a board that would be offering support or feedback, that the matter really should go to planning before it's, if the application comes here and planning hasn't had questions answered, it would be an issue. It would be a concern based on some of our past conversations. So what I was intending to do was to reach back out and see whether or not the matter might just be withdrawn. And if it still is in limbo, then I would say we can revisit.
I'm just trying to organize my mind here.
Understood. Understood.
And maybe that communication could include the fact that this committee, I think the sense is we see merit in the idea, but it would have to be revisited. That merit would have to be brought back. It's not like we're rejecting because it's not a good idea, it's just details.
The
Don't seem
committee,
feasible.
the committee raised,
Rather than, going back and forth a lot, it's better to say to somebody, we've decided to go in a different direction,
Right.
if you could come back at another time with a different plan, that may work out well, because that gives them the ability to go back and go, all right, well, it didn't happen, but now let's regroup, think about what went wrong and fix it, so, that's just my thought.
well, I think that going back to February of this year, the committee provided a lot of detailed questions, and so I think those are some of the talking points that the committee would want to have answered. Anyway, so I'll certainly report back on that. Item 5B, discussion about sports fields in middle school. If I could just direct your attention to, thank you, Shirley, for putting this together for me. This is an email exchange that I had with the engineer. Again, sounding like a bit of a broken record. The scope of work for this project was to look at two potential schematics. The first being, what would it cost to restore the Hanson Middle School field to a properly functioning field using its original design from the 90s. And then the second part of the scope of work, a little more complicated, is the visioning of, with feedback from our sports leagues, what, if anything, would they like to see different on this particular town field? And the reason that we as a committee took this on was so that we would be informed and have an independent piece of information were we to get an application from sports leagues with the support of Parks and Fields. So what I can report to you in this email exchange, which I promise I won't read it, but I'll point out here that the sports person involved here, Nathan Collins, writes to me, and essentially I'll just point out one piece of information which might go into the sports league question that I'd be asking them. He writes that the natural turf multi-purpose field is 190 feet by 360 feet. This will accommodate any rectangular sport, but it is a little narrow for preferred width for soccer and girls lacrosse. 210 feet is the preferred width. So that's a nice piece of feedback which could be then brought to our sports groups to say, all right, is that an important factor? That being said, I asked him for cost estimates to simply restore the field. And as you can see on the email, he starts by chunking out the softball, baseball field in the far corner. And without reading each item, the cost of new infrastructure, irrigation repairs, turf renovation, and by turf I'm saying natural, not artificial. That's $138,500. Oh, and by the way, on a separate piece of paper, there's a drawing as well. So that's $138,500 for costs associated with the softball, baseball field area. And then the costs for the multi-purpose field, which I would call the soccer field, I suppose, about $12,000 of irrigation repairs, about $135,000 for renovated turf to include aeration, top dress, blending of materials, which would be a total of about $147,000.
This doesn't include the track that went around, right?
It does not include the track.
I was going to point that out because that is part of the original design, not on here. And to me, a couple things to think about is, one, would the existence of the track, because it is there, make it easier or harder or be neutral with regard to either restoring the field or maybe even expanding it? And that's a question not for right now, but just be aware. Secondly, is there any appetite in the public for restoring the track? Because that's unspoken about here.
Yeah, the track's in really bad shape. And I'd just like to offer one thing, I don't know if they have plans, but I can get copies of plans and have, in fact, I can have it emailed to you.
John, I appreciate the efforts. We were able to uncover the as-bills.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. So Ernie now has an electronic copy, and Nathan was able to draw from it. So it's good to know that it's not just eyeballing, that there was something for them to look at. I think the point about the track is well taken, and I will convey that to him, because that was something that was on the plan when the original design was put forth. And we would like to have apples to apples. So I'll ask him to revisit the plans and make note of that. And again, we're just looking for the honest assessment. So if it's, if the track is buried like Atlantis and it's got to be dug up or whatever has to happen, just name it and estimate the cost.
I have a question. Given that all the baseball fields are over there, and is there a need for more baseball fields? I'm just wondering, because that was a sport they didn't even really mention. So, and I just want to ask only because I know that, when the kids get to a certain age, baseball is, there's fewer and fewer teams. So I just, in the big picture.
Yeah, your point, I think, is well taken. Of the $138,500 estimated cost to restore, about 76,000 of it is for infield, backstops, and other infrastructure improvements. And so it would have, I think it would have an impact on cost if there was a collective decision by the town or those folks interested in this topic. And that's what that second schematic I'm hoping would reveal, which is nobody seems to be raising their hand saying that there should be. I would, as a citizen, I would be saying things like equal access to fields, not wanting softball to be relegated to just one field in town, or maybe that's not even true, but that's the kind of needs assessment that needs to be looked at. But it's a very valid point, because we may not want to simply restore or advocate an applicant asking to just restore something. This is where we need people outside of our committee to kind of weigh in.
So I wanted to weigh in, like, is this something that's needed? Will it be used? If not, do we maybe want to reconfigure the entire thing? And, or do they use it in school? I don't have an opinion on it, I just want to know.
If I could throw in, I think one of our purposes in doing this was not necessarily to advocate, because we don't know about for this sport or that sport or anything, but to get to the point where we show people what it takes to two things. One, what it takes to prepare cost estimates of a sort that you can actually work with, and without going any further ahead than already did happen about 2.5 decades ago, is that show people we want them to be thinking of what are the priorities. Here's some choices. You can do this one. There's a lot of choices. One is do nothing, leave it alone like Atlantis. Another set of choices looks like this. A third set of choices would be a post an evaluation of priorities, propose something different.
Right.
And this is encouragement to do that.
Yes.
And I think this is kind of
Especially if they have to get matching monies. I'm sorry, especially if they have to get matching monies and, you know, contribute themselves and everything, they may want to scale it back, or, you know, they may see a different need, or whatever. I mean, if we're definitely missing the 20 feet for the soccer field, do we need to move the whole thing over a little bit, encroaching upon what's already there, and maybe use the leftovers for something else? I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying, I think it's worth asking.
Absolutely.
John?
Yeah, well, I had, one of the other thing I wanted to add to this is we've had success with this in the past. I think, you know, Hanson Middle is an area where people do an awful lot of walking, right? And so I feel like it would be nice, much like I think Robertson Field has a walking trail all the way around the perimeter. So I think as part of this, it would create a little area where you can literally walk from the main road, behind the ball fields, around the other side, to the back of the building, and back around again, sidewalks, and a combination of trails that we could help complete on that field area. I think it would be a nice addition and more in keeping with what CPC was really designing.
Two supporting points on that, John. Great idea. Even though it's been sort of buried within conservation, Hanson still does have a trails committee. We've had it since around the year 2000. No, the next one is 20 years old. But that is such a good point, because we are very short as a community of options on places to walk for health, exercise, etc. Now, this would be limited by the fact that this part of it is around school, but we should not fail to encourage people to think about those things. And perimeter trails around maybe Future Park up at the High Street or here, any place, especially places that's to connect to an existing sidewalk, very valuable. The other thing I wanted to say is, as part of our message in sharing this with whomever and how we do it, it should be what we would pretty much require, I would think, as a committee, is any proposal to do something here should follow a well-done process for setting priorities, how to identify the priorities. Again, don't let people go back to the unilateral, well, we're this sports and we want to do one of these, but rather have a broader review of the choices. We're showing them a way to start looking at choices and priorities.
And I would think that this ultimately would come through Parks and Fields. I would think that we would want that committee to be able to offer their support for some sort of as you said, priorities that are built. The easier part is simply saying, what would it take to restore this? But again, part of the scope is to allow for this discussion. So when all the dust settles, what I would hope we would have to review would be a second option, and that option is from direct input from our leagues in town, and something that also is supported by Parks and Fields. Simply for us to then say, if this were to come forward, those constituent groups have not been late to the conversation. Oh, we didn't know that.
Yeah, we've had, all these philosophical discussions before, and I'd like to add to that. I think that we should take this plan, right, and give it to the planning agent and the planning board so that they can review it and look at it from a perspective of, are there any grants out there, right? It'd be a great way to partner with the community on that. So, and we could also get to the point where, that seems like a lot of money, but it's really not, but I think it would break the bank of CDC a little bit. So if we could do a combination of grants and possibly something at town meeting to get some funds as well, so that they can show their support. And then if you have more of a wider community support, I think it's something that people would have trouble saying no to.
I think you may have different sport groups too.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
I think I could say this, but I think soccer would consider putting money in if they knew that. Yeah, one thing I was gonna say is to go back to the original plan, the track around, so that it really doesn't look like that, but
Yes.
another option that might be, it seems as if soccer is gonna use this or lacrosse is gonna use this, to make the rectangular, what is the cost to actually make it the 210
Desirable,
feet?
210.
Oh,
Yeah.
Teresa, thank you
Certainly.
for raising that. I didn't include it in this. I think what I forwarded to Shirley didn't include that. I asked that question. I need to double check this, but I believe Nathan said that it might double the cost of the if he was saying 147, in order to expand the 190 to 210, given the group, I think it's the drop-off,
Yeah.
that it would definitely be a cost escalator, but again, if that's closer to what the town
Just as another
wants.
option.
Exactly
We may
right.
have
Yeah.
the fact that, soccer would put money in, soccer's not gonna put money in if they can't use the fields. They
And
may
it-
put the money in if they can use the
Right.
fields.
And it ties into Diane's point, which is that if we know that the space between the softball outfield and the main playing field is used by younger children,
Right.
shorter fields,
Right.
it does all tie together. So
So he said it could possibly double the 147?
again, I would need to, he may have qualified that a little bit, but I think the impression I got was, oh, it's not just an extra 20 feet times
It's
360.
filling and grading and
Yeah, it
excavating
is.
And it
okay.
probably would result in some additional irrigation adjustments
Yeah.
if that's the case too.
Can I add one more thing to this and then I'll stop?
No, this is, we're not meeting for 2 months, let her rip.
So, I've thought about this subject a lot, and I don't know if you can tell, but, and my thinking is that the biggest problem that's gonna go forward is the maintenance, right?
Yeah.
So, if there's some way to bake some language in there or something like, because I know what happens, and there's no offense to any of these people, because I've been guilty of myself in the past, where, say, we're gonna clean this and we'll take care of it ourselves, and then that person moves on, and that promise doesn't get kept because only one person made it, So I think groups that have these things, it should be baked into their agreements, oh, I would pay for this, but,
Well, John,
what happens after that?
I would be nodding my head in support of what you're saying. I think probably everyone present here, we've been part of conversations here. And speaking for myself on this, I would recommend at some point that this committee, through the chair, communicate directly with Board of Selectmen, the town administrator, to simply raise their awareness that this is what we're looking at. We anticipate there would be an application. However, we are not going, our general consensus is that it is a grave concern in the long run to put forth articles to town meeting that invest in infrastructure improvements when there's not a clear maintenance, there's not enough investment of the town to maintain the fields that the town controls. So the bottom line is, the sooner that the town, in the appropriate locations and times, could have conversations about maintenance, it would go hand in hand.
Yes, it would.
Amen,
Yeah.
amen to that.
Needs
I
to
think
become part of
we
it.
had some very educational discussions earlier this year here in this room on that point, and if you had not already said, I was going to say the same thing. A project of any sort going forward should be not only proposed what it would look like, but how it will be maintained for the foreseeable future.
It's a legitimate question that would be asked at town meeting, and there should be an answer to that question before we would, an article that might have hundreds of thousands of dollars proposed, even in tandem with grants, all this extra work that might go in to bringing this to fruition, and then who's aerating it? And what's the treatment plan? How is that gonna
Because I'm
happen?
not sure I've ever
I
seen
think
a
we've heard that
grant,
loud and clear.
I'm not sure I've ever seen a grant where you could apply for grant for maintenance. It's for upfront, because commitments need to come from the
Right.
community.
I just think it's a good discussion to have, because this has been a problem in the town for a really long time when it comes to the town properties and buildings and the condition of some places, and it's always about the budget, so
Right.
if it's in the budget, then it's an item, a real item that people have to say, yeah, your name to.
Yes.
So I have a question just with the other sports in town. I know that baseball or Little League or whatever pretty much takes care of it over there at Rotary. Like they're responsible for watering it and all of that and growing it and keeping it in beautiful shape like they do. Would does soccer have a board like that
Yes,
is organized like that?
yeah, and they take care of Robinson.
Okay, and.
They pay for a porta potty there, they do the lines.
Okay.
They pay for mowing.
Okay,
The middle school was always a little bit iffy, who was,
It was
they,
nobody's
it
child.
was nobody's child, school
Yeah.
properties, they're not even allowed on it
Mhm.
until a certain period of time.
But again, the need to have it pre-planned in a way that really is feasible if it's on school property, what would be the relationship between the school department and other
Maintenance
users?
group.
Is,
Yeah.
we heard recently here in this room that it's all over the place, depending on which school you're talking about.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's really not a great plan.
Yeah, but Hanson's, you know, after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Hanson's totally in control of those fields that they use after that.
Yeah,
The
right.
school department only has it for a certain amount of time, and then it's given up to the community.
Except that they maintain the schedule.
Right.
The school maintains the schedule after.
There's a lot
We talked
of,
about
like,
that
who
with that
owns this
thing
and
we
who's
did.
got the rights. Not just who's responsible for the maintenance, but who's got the rights to it too.
Oh, yeah.
The whole management piece.
We had that whole discussion during that thing for the what do you call it, athletic thing we put up at the high school.
Correct.
You know, it's on school property, you know, they're maintaining it at this point, but they don't limit anyone's access to it after 3:30, I believe, so, you know, I mean, it's 4 o'clock yet. But I mean, people use it earlier than that.
But they do
Yeah.
limit, I mean, they, for instance, have said,
Yeah.
school has said, you can't use, soccer can't use the inside gyms anymore. They're worried about damage, so there's no place inside. You know, no, you can't use it, because, you know, so the school is maintaining the schedule for a lot of this stuff. So there doesn't need to be a better communication, a facilities person who's, you know, coordinating with the maintenance, coordinating with the teams.
There needs to be clear boundaries about who's responsible for what.
Right.
Okay.
So again, I think that's very helpful. So I would take away from the conversation that perhaps I'd communicate with the planning board, at John's suggestion, alerting them to what we're looking at and seeing if that might start a conversation about perhaps some matching funds. And this is in support of, while it's not someone's application yet, I think we all know that there's a limited number of CPC dollars, and right now we might be advocating for it, and getting some other funds would be good for the town. With regard to the maintenance issue, you know, I'd be happy to at least start some sort of communication. Does that make sense, or is that premature?
No,
I think that's good.
Sooner the better.
Okay.
I mean, it's gonna need the selectmen and the new town administrator to weigh in
Correct.
on the maintenance.
Yeah.
I think it's going to do a lot, really. It could end up being one of our better projects, because I think if we get the town talking, the selectmen talking about, you know, these underlying issues that go with all these fields,
Yeah.
it's awesome.
Great. Okay, and then I'll also have the engineer do 2 things. Well, at a bare minimum, include the track.
Right.
But I'd also ask about the walking trail as well.
Almost like the track, or obliterate the track in favor of a 210-foot field.
Yeah,
Right.
yes.
And my hope is that before we meet again, that would give me enough time to reach back out to, again, volunteers who are running our town sports leagues, giving them an opportunity. What I was saying to Diane before the meeting was that possibly just setting them up with a series of questions, asking a representative from the league to answer these questions so that the person who's the point person on this project could look at all of it. Because there has been some good data gathered on who are the leagues in town, how often are they using the field. That helps to manage the stress of the fields at different times during the year. He could assemble all this information, and then it could lead to a discussion or lead to a second schematic, which might be, hey, you know what? There's not much, there doesn't seem to be a need. Or I remember talking to Damon about football regulations that require that the field area has to be fenced in. Like in order for youth football to play on a contest field, it has to be fenced in. So that would be a non-starter, at least currently. No one will be talking about fencing in the middle school. So that might be just a legitimate way of saying, okay, this is football's desire for their own space. We may have to look elsewhere. But for now, this scope
But
is,
does
again,
lacrosse need that, or
You're right,
any
Patty.
of the other things? I
You're
don't
right.
know if they need any special boundaries set up in any special posts or.
So
These
what-
teams
what's-
need to come together.
what's our need?
Yeah,
And what can we do with this? It's just the middle school. We're not looking at a master plan
No.
involving Indian Head or any other future land that might open up. It's this chunk of space, what are the needs? And maybe not all the needs can be addressed there. And I think that the middle school as well as a constituent group, the physical education program they try to offer at the middle school, and finding people who are passionate about that to also offer some feedback to would be important.
Cross country and track.
Right, the sports programs and such, so, okay, so we'll stay tuned on that, thank you.
If my very last comment on this, You just mentioned, it sounded like we might ask him to look into a perimeter walking trail. If that is something we actually would like to look at, I can see value both for this potential site here, because no matter what is done with the majority of the site, the trail is a very plastic thing. You can shape it around anything else you want it. And but if we were to get an engineer's quote for, let's say you had a jelly bean shaped thing around here as is, just like it as is now, and get a price. There are other opportunities to apply for grants, recreational trail program, which is a grant program, that maybe within less than a year, the town would be looking at. Having at least a pilot type quote would help us know how deep is the water we'd be getting into.
But that would be different from the track.
Oh, yeah,
There's
not
a walking
track.
trail.
There's trail and there's track.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
track, the track was designed with the same eye toward the track itself, right, the trail, then that would be the same thing. Because the kids would be able to use it to run rather than a big circle, they can run around in whatever shape they want.
And then a question about what kind of surfacing, how you had it, how wide,
yeah.
et cetera. But at least if you had, let's say, a walking trail like they have around the perimeter of the Forge Pond Field in Hanover.
Yep.
And just put it around the outline here, again, in a jelly bean shape, and let us know how many tens of thousands.
Since I don't know what kind of track was there before, was it a,
It's
Like Indian
cinder,
Head.
cinder. It's a lot like Indian Head. Probably not a competition grade cinder thing, but I walked it, and I actually ran on a lot of tracks when I was younger.
yeah,
And there are so many track surfaces now, you go crazy, but it's like the old fashioned one. It was just basically a mixture of firm, easily drained, easily packed,
blue stone,
cinder-like
blue stone,
material.
blue
Either stone, crushed stone, or cinders, or you call it cinders, inert material
yeah.
that will stand up to foot traffic.
And is that what,
Concrete.
and if we're,
They could do track on it, so they could do hurdles, they could do
Right.
sprints, they
But
could do.
not today.
No,
They want a synthetic track. I think we're here to talk about walking trail. For people just to walk, you can jog if they want, but not for competition.
yeah, I don't
And it
think
has to be affordable.
it would have, right, and there's certain
That's all.
requirements. Yeah,
Very good.
okay,
Thanks for that feedback. Okay. On to 5C, updates. Jokes notwithstanding about the conservation restriction?
It continues to be, the Tom Smith thing, it continues to be conversations between the Wildlands Trust and the State Department of Conservation Services about the wording of the restriction itself. With the events of recent weeks, including this week, I see the opportunities heating up for we and the Wildlands Trust and that agency to converse about many things, including that. And incidentally, I'll jump the gun a little bit and say that for a reason that's a little further down the list, this month there's a meeting between that grant awardees will have to attend to a workshop with that agency in Westboro, and it might be able to attract some people down face to face.
Great
So,
opportunity.
multitasking.
Very good. Thank you. Next item is the Botieri Field Town Forest Project.
Has anyone taken a look lately, slowed down, look at the corner of the parking lot near the
Most
forest?
everything is cleared away, I like that.
We have now a wide, easily walked through gap where there used to be piles of rubble and briars and
Yes.
trees and rocks and things. The rocks are lined up neatly on the side, and there's two new signs. One that says, Town Forest visitors and Bay Circuit hikers park here, so welcome. And further in is a sign that describes the town forest itself. And though it's not part of it, this leads to, there's about 3/4 of a mile of restored trail all around town forest, all marked with Bay Circuit trail signs. You can go there
Nice.
tonight with a flashlight if you want and walk the whole thing.
Wow.
What remains to be done there is the newly uncovered square footage, again, it's probably maybe about half the size of this room, part of the parking lot that kind of wasn't there before. What is needed is conversation with Parks and Fields and the Highway Department about if if we could perhaps firm up that newly uncovered area rather than just have it remain dirt. Most of the parking lot has had stuff put on it over the years, it will hold up, it won't turn into mud if it rains. If we need to spend a few dollars to firm up this new corner, great, but we need to have the people available to have conversations with. Maybe they'll have a new interim highway director if the time is right for that. And lastly, I need to be able to give the O'Terry Field sign to someone so they can install it. So I have a few modest bills for materials for the signs, for the posts that I'll be putting through the channels. But this last month was kind of a whirlwind of progress.
That's great.
Very good.
Awesome.
Thanks to Sam, to Zeb Andrew, who is an eminent Eagle Scout,
That's great.
and a few town people.
Phil, after these modest bills that you're referencing, are there other tangible expenses then that would we be close to closing it out?
Yes, the only other things we need are, if there be a bill for materials for firming up the newly flattened out parking lot. And secondly, if someone needs to go out and purchase posts and fasteners for the O'Terry Field sign.
Got it.
I have a bill for posts and fasteners for the town forest signs.
Forest signs.
That's less than a couple $100.
Are there funds left in the Rotary side of that as well?
I think it's
I thought we
one
paid
project.
in. Well, no, I know.
It was one number, John, so yes, there is sufficient from what Phil's describing. I mean, it was a few $1,000s, if not more, maybe 5 or 6 at this point.
Even after
More than
everything,
enough to attend to what Phil's describing.
I think there'll be change back from our,
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? I don't know if anyone knows the answer to this, is who's the responsible party for that parking lot area? Is it the Rotary Field Group or is it the highway department? Because I've heard people say that it's the highway department.
Oh, for cleaning it off and stuff?
Yeah, so I wonder if it is true that the highway department is the one that's in charge of that area, then we should get some kind of letter of agreement from them that they wouldn't use it for putting piles in there or something.
if I could speak to that,
Yeah.
I will personally lay down in front of this new cleared area if the utility company tries to put stuff there. But I think honestly, now that it's attractive and we need to talk about fixing and firming up that surface, those conversations have already begun. And I don't know if we want to go so far as to put a sign and say, no utility dumping here. But the point is being made, and it's a good point. I appreciate you bringing it up again.
Yeah, because I wonder if like just a letter of an, sent to the highway department. Yeah.
From this commission, because we spent money here.
Yeah.
Don't mess it up. Sincerely, CPC.
Is that something we could look at some point, having that transferred from whoever is ultimately responsible for it to, like, say, the forest department or the O'Terry Field Group, or somebody that will be willing to maintain it, and would have the authority to say, hey, you can't put that pile there.
Do we have a forest department?
A forestry commission, right?
The forestry commission has no equipment of any kind whatsoever. The highway department has lots of equipment, and so probably some way to improve and continue and even firm up our relationships there makes a lot of sense. But for those reasons, you're right.
Yep.
So is this another town property that nobody's sure who owns the maintenance of it?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know, so I was just asking. I didn't know if anyone here knew. If not, it's probably something of value because it is a parking lot for the town forest now.
If you all you do is look at
The
it,
town uses it, I know.
that is used for many, many, many things. If
Yeah.
there's a function in the school, the school used it. If there's a function for a parade, whoever gets there first used it. If it's for baseball, if it's open for baseball field, they use it.
It's overflow from a funeral.
It's for funeral
Yeah.
home. It is an asset to the town in every way. It probably makes sense to have the highway department continue to maintain it, but we need to be very clear about some of those details.
I think we need, all that area in the front, where they cut all the trees down. I think we need some kind of plantings there.
We are probably, I think we are, as I looked at the project site that we're talking about here, and we had this good progress, I immediately thought, the town is nowhere near done with fixing this up. It looks like another Eagle Scout project, landscaping the berm
Yeah,
from the corner of that parking lot over along the front of the town forest. It's like a nice garage you built, but you have to put paint on it yet or anything like that. It's useful, but it doesn't look real pretty yet.
Well, you know, it's one of those things, it's like we've spent time and money in fixing this all up. It'd be nice when you drive by out of the corner of the eye, it looks like something worth looking at. Instead of a big pile.
Ooh, I wonder what that is. Let's pull in and check it out.
Well, pull in and read the signs, right?
Yeah,
Very good.
but I'm gonna stop talking.
they need to have some chalk lines over there too, so people realize that you're in 5 spaces.
Likely to be, that topic it will be revisited by us, and that's appropriate. Fort Meadowbrook Improvement Project.
Between myself and the Conservation Office, we've had, since our last meeting, several calls to communications with the contractor who has been hired to do this. They continue to not have had time to do it. I think our next conversation with them will be in a very polite manner to say, do you wish to continue to have this money to do this, or might the town seek another contractor? Because if they're too busy to do it, if they don't have the capacity, then I don't want to wait another, month, 2 months, 10 months, a year. It's just not feasible. So we'll elevate.
Very good.
By the way, it might be helped once Conservation finds its next new administrative assistant. Those communications will be helped.
Ramp up, yeah. Very good, thank you. On Alan's behalf, we don't, there's no update for Bonnie House at this point. And just enough time for Phil to get a drink of water to go to item 5, PCH Park Engineering Plan.
I believe a week from today, we'll be having our next meeting, and we'll see where we are. Earlier today, I actually was down at Land Planning and mentioned to the chief drawer of such things that we look forward to progress, but there's nothing substantive to report yet. We've been kicking the ideas around, but I hope that we'll start to have something. The only things that have been put in our hands so far are just not worth bringing to other people. They're just too raw and not close to what we really want to do. But the good news is, I think we've got the right contractor and we're working on it.
Great, thanks. Diane, North End cabins?
Yep, they're still being repaired with screens. Some need new doors. A lot of graffiti has recently popped up, so it's all the time. And the big cabin, which is like the big open giant screen house
Oh,
at the north end, yeah, at the back, that has been torn apart, like the screens on it and everything, so we need to, that's the next big screen.
It was torn apart,
The screens on it.
fix it.
No, no,
in a
vandalism.
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 Vandal.
And some railings were put on it and some new stuff. So there's been a lot of things going on. It's sort of an ongoing, yes.
I have a question. I hope you don't take this the wrong way. I thought that the North End cabin was very specific about what those funds could be used for, and I just want to caution you not to use those funds for something outside the scope of what was written.
Yeah, we have a copy of the grant.
Yeah, I just, I don't want you to go awry and start, doing stuff that's not on the list.
Right.
Because you'll be on the hook for it, so. just
Okay.
wanted to throw that out there.
Yep.
If I could, I should go back to the PCH Park thing. It's important to know, the committee, along with the town administrator, looked very hard at the outstanding, or the remaining obligation to the first park planning contractor. And I think we've resolved it. We, not quite as much as the person was billing us for, but in a way that I think would satisfy any legal and ethical requirements. The work that was done this past winter and spring by that previous contractor, we communicated with Mary the amount that it would take to satisfy that. That is CPC money, but it will still leave the majority of it for working with this new phase that we're in now. So I think barring a different update from the town administrator, I think we put the first contractor behind us and said thank you, we appreciate what was done. And in other words, clearing the decks for this next phase.
Very good. Diane, did you have anything else to add? Okay, thank you.
In the other old business, did you resolve whether we had spent all the money for the HPP and housing
I
production
didn't.
plan?
I did not, Teresa, no. Teresa and I had a conversation where it appeared as though there was a favorable balance, but the number that we brought to town meeting was based on the quote, so Teresa asked me to.
They've been fully paid, so
Yes.
if there's something extra in there, then we should figure that out.
Okay, yeah, I will double check that.
Into the fund, right?
Even,
Was that
there
approved by
shouldn't be
CPC?
anything extra.
Yeah, I think the confusion was that it appeared as though maybe they were underbilling, that the amount that we went to town meeting with was the amount, I think, of the quote for the services, so it may have been a billing issue on their end, which should leave it to a net zero, but I will look into that, report back. There's no other historical commission business under 5D, and moving on to new business.
Excuse me, old business?
Yes,
Wing
Patty.
at Sleeper property, that was just passed at town meeting.
Right.
And I
Yes,
think we should add that as an ongoing,
agreed.
Actually,
It is-
excellent point, I
It
didn't
is
see it listed here.
now alive and well.
All day, I was anticipating talking about it tonight. Hooray.
yes,
Yes.
Because,
thank you.
well, hooray, thank you to the citizens of Hanson who voted to allocate that money. The good news, as with everything CPC, is it's not new money being asked for, it's money we have, that we've been prudently putting aside. And it follows the other great announcement, which is we're getting a grant for $203,000.
That was approved?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, it
Yes.
was approved.
We got a phone call the last week of September saying, don't say anything till Wednesday, but you're gonna get the money.
So you knew at the town meeting that you were gonna get the grant?
We said so.
Yes, it was
Oh,
in
you did say
it
it?
was in the form,
Oh, I
that
didn't
we got
see
the
it.
grant,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, and unlike 6 years ago, in
Yes.
that agency, we didn't know until December,
Yes.
late December, after Christmas, that we're getting it. But the state heard complaints from all around the whole Commonwealth that, can't you tell us sooner so that we can plan stuff?
Oh.
And I think that's gonna be to everyone's benefit. So we will be getting the $203,000 from the state. Thanks to the voters, we'll be getting $98,000 of CPC open space money. And we're not through. We are 99% sure that around Thanksgiving, we're going to apply for another modest amount, probably plus or minus 10,000 from the Fields Pond Foundation. Because there are administrative costs, things like surveying the property, perhaps an environmental assessment, a few other things like that, and also maybe paying for CR monitoring, that we wish to not leave any gaps in the future of this property, and we wish to not incur any debts that we can't handle. But a few months ago, I had a conversation with the Fields Pond Foundation. They were kind of enthused about the opportunity. But that would be like January money. It's not, the 2019 money is all spent, but they said, please apply.
What's CR?
Conservation restrictions. When we spend money for open space with CPC money, because some of that money is from the state,
Right.
they need a document that has a third party watch over our management of that new open space, like a hawk, to make sure we don't convert it to something else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like pave it, or put a new town building on it.
Right, okay.
It needs to remain for that purpose, so the money was well spent.
Nice.
And that's why we keep coming back to the Thomas Mill, because that property, that 1 acre, is being washed over as well.
Okay.
Can I ask him that? Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say that the restriction like that would keep something like the water department from taking land to put a well in.
Water, the new goal.
Well, actually, Article 97 provides restrictions.
No, that's
But-
different.
But the good news is, everyone at every level of government and society recognizes you have to watch your open space like a hawk,
Okay.
or else they know you're not serious.
So what's the holdup on
What do you mean,
the
hold up?
small conservation restriction?
Back on Thomas Mill,
Never mind. We'll do it another time.
we
Sorry.
discussed it a lot.
Yeah, I just don't
The
understand it.
progress is on the horizon.
Why it's so slow.
Teresa, you had a
Yeah,
comment or question?
the The initial inquiry by the Story family about the land behind on West Washington Street, has that ever materialized to anything?
Those discussions have not really gone forward because we didn't have the bandwidth to do so. We didn't have the capacity on top of everything else. Well, haven't even gone to the workshop for this one yet, but with a new, with a conservation agent in place as of very recently, and with a new conservation administrative assistant in place hopefully soon. And we're gonna have to need a new commissioner soon because one of our commissioners is moving to Braintree, we are told. We hope to find the capacity to look into that. So yes, but we're very close to being so overcommitted that we can't do anything. We just need to finish a few things and then we'll get into other new things.
And did somebody get back to them to let them know that?
I don't know, but it wasn't me. But the person we work with Wildlands Trust has been in conversation with them. So I think that indirectly, there has been some level of maintenance of the discussion. I just haven't been part of that.
Because it came to us, and
Teresa, my memory is that we turned around an official letter to conservation with a copy of what the gentleman communicated to this committee.
but did we copy Mr.
But I
Story
don't-
on that communication?
Do not remember if we did. I can't say
So
for
can we
certain.
circle back and ask that a letter be written to them stating where we are with it? And is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm happy to just give them a call myself or whatever, that it came, we acknowledged it, it's on our agenda, it's at confirmation, they've been a little, conservation, they've been a little
So do you-
overwhelmed
do
or
you want us
something.
to, like, make a motion to allow you to reach out to them, or?
Well, whatever the chair thinks is
Yeah.
appropriate or,
I see nothing wrong, Teresa, with you reaching out and conveying what we've,
that
essentially
we're all
acknowledged
interested,
here.
we're looking forward to it,
Right.
there's.
We've referred the matter to conservation, we wouldn't be able to take action or want to have someone invest in, it would ultimately be conservation's advocacy that would come before this board to spend the money for the property, but
Or
our lack of-
citizen?
true, that's true. As a courtesy, I think that's really where you are right
Yeah.
now.
Right, it would be, I would say that there's one other point that can be made, is just very informal, and that is that if we hadn't had the pleasant surprise of a time-sensitive opportunity come before us this past winter, in the super property, we might have already spent that time on what you're describing.
Mhm.
But there are people above and beyond conservation who recognize the priority of what we just did, but now I would love to see that made a priority.
Okay.
Excellent. Right. So I would, Shirley, I would like to suggest that that matter that Teresa brought up, we put that under old business, which, what's the best way to refer to it? The story,
Story.
S-T-O-R-E-Y, property,
Mhm. West Washington.
and that will just be a memory aid for us to revisit the topic. Okay. That's great. Any other, I think we're back up at 5.
Sorry, tell me what was I
Sure,
Oh,
sure.
I'm sorry, I was just asking Teresa, I'm wondering if there's some way we could use administrative funds, right, to start the process of finding out what it would take to create a real estate trust for open space. So, and the reason for that is because it would have its own committee, right, and it would have funds because we would have to get a CR from somebody, well, we could get that from a local land trust because the state provides for that. So what I guess my question to Teresa was, what do we think it would take to start that ball? And could we, as a committee, create that entity and fill it with people as needed? Because it would become an entity unto itself, because there's people like Teresa, myself, and a lot of other people that I know that are very interested in, having land in town in open space. So that's a good way to garner support and financial backing, and if we had a land trust, then we could, which is actually, it's a land trust that created CPC in the first place. So, I mean, I think it wouldn't hurt for us to look in that direction. So I guess my question would be, how much do we think it would cost, and can we get the funds from CPC to do it?
I can answer a few of those. It's a good idea to bring up again, but about 18 years ago, we had those discussions, and the decision was, do we form a town open space committee, or do we form a land trust? The land trust would have been prohibitively more expensive, and by doing the open space thing, not only did we create a group, which people are still welcome to participate in, to advocate for these things, but also it gave us a seat at the government table, the town government table. A land trust can be a great thing, but it is a financial commitment. The minimum cost is not too much this side of $1,000 a year to maintain registration with the state, with the Secretary of State. And then there are other costs like maintaining the infrastructure of someone would need to, basically, you need an office somewhere, even if it's just a desk in someone's house, and someone we have to willing to be doing the work of working volunteers. And if you were to receive donations, someone has to do a serious accounting job. So you could, but I'm just saying, it would probably be, it's enough cost that that's why there aren't more of them. But it's a good enough idea, that's why there are already a lot of them in some of the places.
Right.
Typically, there's a benefactor who will start the
With
trust.
some funds, you know,
There are
I think,
technical assistance programs too that offer our towns, the toolkit, I've seen the toolkit on how to
Yeah.
create a land trust and then where to go apply for grant funds in order to start it up and get the operating costs.
it's kind of like, you know, the Friends of Open Space. I mean, it's a group, if it had a 501(c) or whatever that is, then they could, you know, take funds from people. They could.
They could accept
fundraising,
gifts from
They could
people.
accept gifts. And so there's a lot that opens the door when you think this direction. So I'm just wondering.
So John, your question is,
Administrative funds.
can we find out whether it's permissible for CPC administrative funds to be used
Or explore the option.
to explore the option
Yeah,
and feasibility of establishing a land trust?
yes.
I can look up where, I have a few friends who work at land trusts too and work with them consistently on the side, so I can just look up where those toolkits are and have that information circulated.
Because I think it would be a great information tool as well, because I think if people knew that there was a land trust looking to purchase open space in town, and people, when they go down to their tax collector and, you know, and that person says, well, you know, there's a land trust in town that may be willing to look at this. So now you have a whole new avenue for identifying sites that people may be interested in donating land to the town or to an open space trust or.
And this entity would be independent of the
It's a
A
town?
land trust is a
Yes.
private organization,
Yeah.
it's not a government organization.
You know, quasi-public in the sense that, you know, its purpose is public.
It is complementary to town and state land protection. It's,
And, you know, it can hold CRs, things like that, you know, it can do things that, you know, an open space committee, a town committee can't do. You know,
if you have the funds to operate it.
yeah, absolutely.
Very good.
So finally, on the old business, so John was gonna make a motion to allow me to call Mr. Story.
Well, that's right, yeah.
I second that.
Motion is made and seconded. Any further discussion? We're clear on what Teresa's going to do. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Very good.
Sorry, I added 10 minutes more on this thing.
So any other old business? And then under item 6, we're down to, there's no new historical commission or CPC related business. Is there any other new business before the committee tonight? Under 6C, hearing none. Under 7, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Patty, second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous.
And our next meeting is December.
Our next meeting will be in December.